McLaren seal back-to-back constructors titles, but at what cost, as Lando Norris makes contact with Oscar Piastri on the opening lap of the Singapore Grand Prix, while out at front, George Russell cruised to victory at the Marina Bay Circuit. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks, with the packing up going on behind you, Ian, obviously, before shipping off to Austin, Texas for the US Grand Prix next up. And obviously, first things first, congratulations, McLaren, back-to-back Constructors champions. But I mentioned, Ian, at what cost? Because it didn't happen without a bit of controversy on the opening lap at turn 3. An awesome start from Lando from 5th, was in a position to challenge Oscar Piastri for 3rd position at turn 3. Oscar left the room. Fair play. Lando went for the gap, made slight contact with Max in 2nd, which broke his front wing end plate. A bit of damage, but manageable for the entire race, but also made contact with Oscar. Fair to say, Oscar absolutely furious.
Normally we talk about cool, calm, collected Oscar Piastri. This time around, he was anything but. As you say, first of all, congratulations to McLaren on their back-to-back Constructors titles. First time they have achieved that feat in 34 years since their illustrious heyday of 88 to 91 when they won 4 in a row. So that's that taken care of. Well done, McLaren. It's always been on the cards pretty much since the Bahrain pre-season test, in fairness. And they've dominated the season from that point on. And finally, Mick, finally, we have the bit of needle between Oscar and Lando that we have been waiting for all season long. Because up until this particular point, save for Lando going into the back of Oscar in the Canadian Grand Prix, which of course was purely accidental on Lando's part. One he apologized for profusely afterwards because he knew he'd made a mistake. On this occasion, this was a clear overtaking opportunity. There was a gap for Lando. He went for it. It was lap 1. Saw that gap. He was starting on 5th on the grid, remember, folks. Oscar Piastri on 3rd. Max Verstappen on 2nd. George Russell on pole position. Lando got a great launch. Went up the inside of Oscar. As you say, Nick, a touch with Max Verstappen's Red Bull, but kind of knocked Lando a little askew. Saw him go across onto Oscar. And then for once, the normally cool, calm, collected Oscar Piastri decided to vent his feelings over the radio, making quite clear that if that's the way Lando wanted to go racing, then maybe it should be discussed post-event. And that is exactly the kind of debriefs and discussions that are going to take place in the days leading up to the US Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time, of course. That one now, we got a bit of a gap before the next race, the doubleheader in Austin and Mexico City. But you can imagine there's going to be plenty of reviews, plenty of discussions. It's all about McLaren and the way it goes racing, its principles of racing, the way its drivers should conduct themselves on track, because as far as they are concerned, they do not want to see any contact between their drivers, even though you could argue there was a slight mitigating circumstance. Lando felt he'd done nothing wrong. As I say, he just got that touch on Max's Red Bull, and that sent it into Oscar. Be interesting to read all the comments that I'm pretty certain are going to follow underneath this video once it goes live. If you do, folks, please keep it clean and respectful. That's all we ask for in our comment section below our videos.
Yeah, certainly a very interesting moment. It's worth pointing out we'll give our opinions on that moment in the podcast on Monday, where we have a lot more time to really sit down and dissect everything that happened. But something that did happen as a result of Lando getting ahead of Oscar was he sat in 3rd for then the entirety of the race. Oscar sat in a pretty lonely 4th. Lando got within 1 second of Max Verstappen in 2nd pretty quickly, but just sat there for pretty much the entire race, could not find a way past, as is often the case at the Marina Bay Circuit, despite the fact Max was dealing with downshift issues, not for the first time this season, balance issues, brake issues. I mean, there was enough going on for Max to deal with rather than focusing on Lando behind him, but nevertheless, Max in 2nd, but crucially, has ruled himself out of the driver's title.
Well, he says that, but...
He says that, but...
In all honesty, is that really the case? It's fully expected that the next circuit of the Americas, should be good for Red Bull. Less so for McLaren. Again, it's one of those. It's going to be circuit by circuit now as we go through these last 6 Grand Prix. It is, of course, a big cushion. It's 63 points, I believe, now to Oscar
Yep.
Piastri. That extra 7 points, if Max had managed to get ahead of George Russell and go on to take a first victory here at the Marina Bay Street Circuit in 9 attempts, he's still awaiting that Grand Prix win at Singapore, then yes, that would have made a big difference and maybe Max would have talked up his chances a little bit more. There are still 174 points on the table. We can't rule him out completely.
Yep.
First, second over the past 3 Grand Prix, it's still a significant chunk of points he has taken out of Oscar's lead overall. It is still a mammoth task. It cannot be denied. If Max wants to rule himself out of the equation, that's obviously up to him. While he still has skin in the game, shall we say, and he still does at that, that car has proven itself over these 3 Grand Prix, even if it was not quite set up correctly, as was told to me by Pierre Vacher, the Red Bull technical director, after the race itself. You can catch some of that interview in some of our articles that are going to go out after this over the coming days after this Grand Prix weekend. Some quite informative stuff from Pierre about the car and the way it's being handled at the minute and the way in particular it was set up. And he and his team take full responsibility for the fact that it was not quite in the window in which they wanted it. And therefore, it was unable to get close enough to George in qualifying. And in particular, it was unable to get close enough to George overall for the race win. George just on a different level to such an extent that pretty much after the start, we barely saw a sniff of him on our TV screens. It was all about the stuff going on behind. But that was to be expected given the comfortable nature of George Russell's victory here under the lights at Singapore.
Yeah, Verstappen very much had to focus on Norris behind rather than Russell here. So let's discuss George Russell very quickly because, as you mentioned, we didn't really see him. And I'll go back to a comment you made in our post-qualifying F1 update when you asked our viewers, who saw that coming? Well, ahead of this Grand Prix, who would have seen a George Russell victory coming? I certainly did not, because it's hot, it's humid, it's all the conditions that Mercedes tend to hate. But actually, it seems that car has loved Singapore.
On this occasion, yes, we know that Mercedes just simply has not had any kind of love affair for the most part with Singapore. Yes, there was that fabulous pole position and victory from Lewis Hamilton in 2018, of course. But since then, it's been a real struggle for team and drivers around this circuit. Even coming into qualifying, even coming into Q2, George was not expecting to be where he eventually ended up. As we saw in practice on Friday, he had that crash into a barrier that really put him on the back foot. And George noted himself after qualifying that for the most part, he thought it was going to be a struggle, but somehow that car just came alive for Q2 initially, and then Q3 in particular, landing him that pole position, and it stayed alive for him throughout the duration of the Grand Prix. As I say, to such an extent, he was barely seen on the TV screens other than the start. And of course, when he eventually took the checker flag, in between times, it was just a breeze around these hot, humid conditions here in Singapore.
Yeah, a big result for George, given obviously Mercedes very much in the fight for second in the Constructors, a position they do currently hold. To quickly go through the top 10 from the Singapore Grand Prix, George Russell was victorious ahead of Max Verstappen, Lando Norris in third, Piastri fourth, Kimi Antonelli in fifth, Charles Leclerc sixth, Fernando Alonso in seventh, Lewis Hamilton in eighth, Ollie Bearman in ninth, and Carlos Sainz in 10th. And Ian, we need to end by discussing Hamilton and Alonso, because Hamilton had finished in seventh at the checker flag, but was given a post-race 5-second time penalty for effectively exceeding track limits too many times in the closing laps, but under the most bizarre circumstances, because he quite literally ran out of brakes. He was really quick in the closing stages, one of the only drivers to make 2 pit stops, giving him brilliant pace in the closing laps. If it wasn't for the brake issue, would have probably finished in fifth given his pace. Ended up finishing in seventh, in eighth, ended up losing in the last 2 laps, about 40 seconds to Alonso, given the extent of his issues, was cutting corners just to try and get to the checkered flag. Alonso crossed the line 0.4 seconds behind Hamilton, of course, gained the position following Lewis's penalty. But Fernando, absolutely furious that Lewis was allowed to finish.
It was a superb drive in the end from Lewis Hamilton up until those closing couple of laps, because great strategy call by Ferrari to bring Lewis in for that set of socks, as you've touched on. And he was absolutely flying at a rate of knots. He ultimately set the fastest lap of the Grand Prix, and he caught up behind his teammate Charles Leclerc. Charles, yes, of course, allowed him by, but nevertheless, if Charles had decided not to do so, Lewis, I'm sure, would have got past quite comfortably. And then, of course, he was on the tail of Kimi Antonelli, and it looked nailed on that he was going to grab fifth position by the end of the race. Unfortunately for Lewis, as you say, those brakes just gave out and then some. And the rate at which he lost lap time, that car was unsafe. Bottom line is, at a circuit like this, with the wall so close, anything could have happened to Lewis. He was nursing that car through those brake issues. And as you rightly pointed out, Fernando was coming right behind him, 0.4 of a second at the checkered flag. Boy, was Fernando miffed. If anybody's managed to catch Fernando's onboard radio, he let out a stream of profanity, one sentence in particular, that he repeated several times over, containing the F word. He could not believe what he had just seen. Basically, Lewis driving, as I say, a Ferrari that he felt was unsafe, that should not have been on the car. He pointed out the fact that people tried to disqualify him previously for having a dodgy wing mirror when he had that on his car, and he managed to get through that. But on this occasion, this was definitely a more unsafe car with the brakes around this type of circuit than Fernando and a dodgy falling off wing mirror I think is it the United States Grand Prix? I recall
I believe
correctly.
it was. I believe it
I think it
was.
was the
I've been
United
trying to
States
figure
Grand
this out
Prix.
myself.
Yeah, I think it was. I should have done my research before talking about this one, but yeah, I think I am correct in saying that. Anyway,
Yes.
that was Fernando's comment about the fact that he was driving with a car with this dodgy wing mirror, and people tried to get him disqualified on that occasion for that, whereas Lewis had this Ferrari with virtually no brakes whatsoever, obviously pulled up for numerous track limits
Yes.
offences. That got him the 5-second penalty at the checkered flag. At least Fernando Alonso managed to get that place that he should really have had anyway on track. But ultimately, it was a 0.4 gap at the flag. But that 5-second penalty meant that that vaulted Fernando into that second position.
Absolutely. Ian, amazing stuff as always. If you've enjoyed this F1 update, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, comment below your thoughts on the Singapore Grand Prix. And I'm going to ask you fans a question. Should McLaren have made should McLaren have made Lando Norris give the place back to Oscar Piastri? Let us know your thoughts on that clash and what you think McLaren should have done. And be sure to check out our podcast on Monday, because it is one of the more unique ones of the year, and I'll explain why in the podcast. For myself and Ian, we'll see you later. Bye, guys.
Thanks as always for watching and listening over the course of this Singapore Grand Prix weekend. Catch you in the podcast, folks, and next time out in Austin, Texas.